Hi guys. I only had a few questions submitted about imperialism. You don't need to know about global imperialism for the U.S. regions. You just need to know about the U.S. becoming imperialistic. What we see is the world has become imperialistic, and in order to compete with that, the United States is going to have to kind of step up their game. And this takes place with the Spanish-American War. So Spain still had some colonies in the Caribbean, including like Cuba and Puerto Rico, and the U.S. is investing heavily in the region. So part of the U.S. trying to go to war with Spain has to do with protecting U.S. interests, protecting their economic interests, but also Spain was carrying out a number of atrocities against like the Cubans. And this obviously didn't set well with a lot of Americans who felt we should intervene. During the Spanish-American War, we see yellow journalism is going to be utilized by newspapers to report on these atrocities in sensational ways to try to sway public opinion against the Spanish. One of the biggest cases of yellow journalism was the U.S. ship, the USS Maine, which was stationed in Havana, Cuba, which was sunk, and Spain was blamed for it. And they used this to encourage American support of the Spanish-American War. Theodore Roosevelt fought in the Spanish-American War. He led the Rough Riders, and they were able to defeat the Spanish in a short period of time. And this is where the U.S. emerges as an imperialistic nation, because with the defeat of Spain, the U.S. gets their first colonies. Cuba, which ultimately will be given their independence. Puerto Rico, which is still a commonwealth of the United States. Guam, which we still have bases in. And then the Philippines, which, after some bloody battles, ultimately will get their independence from the U.S. as well. But this starts the U.S. imperialism and starts the U.S. gaining colonies. We then see the U.S. Will become imperialistic even further. They will annex Hawaii in order to have military base in the Pacific Ocean. So that's the extent of kind of what you would need to know about imperialism. We also see the U.S. will get territory through purchases, like we purchase Alaska. And we encourage Panama to have a revolution against Colombia, so that once Panama is independent, the U.S. can then start to build the Panama Canal and get access to that. So the U.S. now, instead of going around South America, can cut through Panama, so we can get our ships into the Pacific faster to our colonies over there. So the original review videos that I've done and posted with the timestamps really goes into detail on that, but someone had asked if we needed to know about global imperialism. I just want to clarify. That's kind of like, just the big idea. As far as like World War I, World War II, you should know why the U.S. gets involved. So World War I, a lot of that is unrestricted submarine warfare. You see Germany has sunk Lusitania. Americans were on board. Germany says they'll stop their unrestricted submarine warfare, but they do not. We also saw like the Zimmerman Note, which I go into detail in my other video, but is from Germany to Mexico, telling Mexico if the U.S. goes to war with Germany, that Mexico should then invade America. So they're trying to make alliances, and this angers the U.S. as well. And we enter. Keep in mind that as males go to fight in the war, women step up in World War I to work in factories, but when the males return, most of them return home. World War II, the U.S. enters after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. Again, women are going to work in factories. However, this time when soldiers return, more women stay working in fields and outside the home. Again, my original video will go more into detail, so I don't want to go too much into that. I just want to see if I'm actually, if you can see me. Don't want to go too much into. You can hear me. Sorry, I just want to check, because last week when I did my review for global, I was having some technical difficulties. So I just want to make sure you can hear me. Let me check a couple other questions that people had regarding imperialism, World War One. U.S. doesn't really get involved in the world wars to become imperialistic. We get more pulled in. We're trying to remain neutral. We don't want to get involved. You know, ultimately, the U.S. kind of has their hand tied and have to get involved. As far as specific battles of the war, really for World War One, it's more about why we get involved on restricted submarine warfare and the Zimmerman Note. The other thing to know about World War One would be the 14 points that Woodrow Wilson puts forward, his 14 points for world peace. And he, really believed in this peace without victory. He didn't want to punish the Germans. He believed in self-determination. He was like, all these nations that had been controlled by Germany should be allowed to determine their future. He also believed that there should be a League of Nations, an organization of nations to prevent future conflicts. And, he really just wants to maintain world peace. With the 14 points, the only one that's actually implemented into the Treaty of Versailles is the League of Nations. And of course, the United States Congress refuses to ratify that treaty and join the League of Nations because they're concerned that this alliance would pull the U.S. into more conflicts. This, of course, makes the League of Nations extremely weak. They are unable to prevent another war, and ultimately we end up with World War II. As far as World War II, you should know that we were attacked by Japanese at Pearl Harbor. This is the catalyst for the U.S. joining World War II. We also, know that FDR will sign an executive order to relocate Japanese American citizens on the West Coast in response to this attack. The Supreme Court will hear this out with Korematsu versus U.S., but ultimately, the Supreme Court will rule that, in times of crisis, we can restrict civil rights. And it's not until the 1980s that there's a formal apology for Japanese relocation, and reparations will be paid to those who had been placed in relocation camps. You don't really need to know about any major battles for World War II. You may be asked about the U.S. dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is something that many people argued would help prevent American lives from being lost by an invasion of mainland Japan. Other way to demonstrate to the world our power and superiority. Our allies did not know that we were developing this. The Soviet Union and Stalin didn't know we were doing this until we dropped the bomb. So those are the extent of really what you should know about World War II. And of course, also in World War II, think about the home front. It's a total war. Women are working in factories. People are rationing. They're conserving. People are buying war bonds to invest in the war efforts. But otherwise, that's like the extent. I'll post a link to my original video for you to see more information or more details about the content. I don't want to spend too much time on the content because it's already been covered. I just wanted to clarify some questions people had. But I do want to share with you the January 2018 Regents. We had done this in class, and there's been requests for me to go over the questions that people got the most wrong. So I'm going to go through that and look at some strategies for approaching those questions. And then I'll also give you some tips and tidbits about the thematic essay and the DBQ and how to avoid some of the common issues I see when I grade them. So I'm going to share my screen. Yay! And hopefully this time you can see it because this was an issue last week when I accidentally didn't share my screen and the global kids obviously couldn't see it. So you should be able to see me, yay. Or not me, but the screen. So this is the January 2018 region. So if you have it on you, you can get it out. I'm going to start with question 6. So use the test to take the test. I can't say this enough. With the essays, if you complete the essay task and you have analysis, you're going to do well. So when I get to those points, I'll point out some other things to keep in mind when you get there. So you have 50 multiple choice questions. They usually start out with something basic about colonial America. geography, maybe a map, and then it gets into like the Constitution, etc. So 6 was the first question that people struggle with. And what I find is early American history and the Constitution is what people struggle with the most. And then as we get to more modern periods, especially like imperialism and the World War, since you did that in global, it makes more sense. So one way the original Constitution of the United States addressed the issue of congressional representation was by, so this is about representation in Congress. So Congress is a bicameral legislature. That means there's 2 houses. There's the House of Representatives, which is based on population. So every 10 years we have a census, and every 10 years based on that count, your state will be proportioned a certain number of representatives. So it's based on how many people live in your state. The Senate is equal. Everyone gets 2 senators. So during the Constitutional Convention, people were concerned about how representation would be determined and who would be counted as part of the population, because obviously you want to have as much representation in Congress as possible, because that kind of gives you a little bit more power. So not counting women as part of the state's population, obviously, you know, that's just ridiculous. Women didn't have the right to vote, but they're still being counted as part of the population. 2, counting 3/5 of the enslaved population when determining representation. This is known as the 3/5 compromise. It's one of the big compromises at the Constitutional Convention. A lot of people get confused here, but each southern state was arguing that a good portion of their population were enslaved persons. And they wanted these people to count so that they would have more representation in Congress. Of course, people in the North were arguing, well, why should your slaves count as part of your population when you consider them property, not human beings? So there was a compromise made, and they would be counted as 3/5 of a person for the determining representation for Congress. So 2 is the answer here. As far as setting a 4-year term of office for all members of Congress, there are no term limits. Except for the president, which wasn't even established until Franklin Delano Roosevelt had been elected 4 times. And it says given every state the same number of representatives in the House. That's not the case. House of Representatives is based on population. I do have a video on the Constitution I will post as well that kind of reviews everything I think we did during the midterms. 10's the next question. So an example of the unwritten Constitution. This was a common issue on the other practice regions we did too. Unwritten Constitution means it's whatever it is, it's not written down in the Constitution. It's unwritten. So the impeachment process is written in the Constitution. It explains the role of the Supreme Court, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. The 2-house legislature, again, addressed in the Constitution. Congress is a 2-house legislature. Presidential veto power, addressed in the Constitution. The president has the power to veto. The formation of political parties is not written down in the Constitution anywhere. So there's nothing about the structure of political parties or that they should exist at all. This is just a practice that has been put into place. So it's considered part of the unwritten Constitution. It's part of how our country kind of runs and our government runs, but it's not written down anywhere. Some of the other examples of the unwritten Constitution you might see would be the original 2-term precedent set by George Washington, or the presidential cabinet. So the cabinet are his advisors. There's nothing in the Constitution that says the president's going to have advisors, but it was a precedent set by George Washington. It was like, I need people to advise me. 13 is the next question. So it says, which event most directly contributed to the growth of New York City as a nation's leading trade center? This was also a question, a similar question that people missed on the last test. So New York City has a harbor, and you can hop on your boat and go all the way up the Hudson River. And it's the opening of the Erie Canal that will now connect the Hudson River to Lake Erie, which is a great lake. So this allows people in New York City to go up the Hudson River, hop on the Erie Canal, go over to the Great Lakes, and then reach market people in the Midwest, farmers, etc. So this allows people to ship goods from the Midwest easily into Eastern markets, but New York is going to become one of the leading trade centers because of these connections. 17. So which heading best completes the partial outline below? So you have protective tariffs. So these are taxes on imports to protect American businesses. Railroad subsidies. So this is government money or funding given to railroads to help offset the cost of business. And the use of troops to end strikes. So using military troops or the National Guard to end labor strikes. So this is not the New South. The New South has to do with after the Civil War. Government support big business. I can make an argument for that. The U.S. government is creating protective tariffs. They're helping railroads build up. They're ending labor strikes to get workers back to work. So 2 makes sense. Technology, the Industrial Revolution, none of that has to do with technology at all. And the use of collective bargaining. No, collective bargaining is when you have a union and that union bargains with the management of a business on behalf of all workers. This has not, isn't just about collective bargaining. So the best option would be for 17 to the government support of big business. So hopefully what you've noticed here is I'm using reasoning skills to look at my options. I'm not just like, oh, I know the answer. I'm looking at this and be like, what makes sense? What's the best answer? That's what they're looking for in the regions, the best answer. So even if you weren't certain what the New South was, looking at these, you should be able to tell it's not technology. You should be able to tell that, the collective bargaining, collective, a group bargaining together, that's not the case here. And you should be able to narrow it down. The best answer is government support big business. So early during the rise of big business, the government is supporting the big business leaders. It's as we move into the progressive era that the government is going to stop their laissez-faire policies and they're going to start to regulate business and support workers. Okay. 37. Let's see, where are we? 37. So, which 2 issues led to protests and riots in many American cities during the 1960s? So, you should think about what's going on in the 1960s in America. Civil rights, women's rights, other groups are fighting for rights. It's the Vietnam War. And then look to see what makes the best sense for what would lead to protests and riots. So, space exploration and environmental pollution. I mean, people are excited about space exploration and they're angry about environmental pollution, but I don't know if anyone's really rioted about that. The Vietnam War and racial injustice, well, definitely led to protests and riots. Inadequate healthcare and women's liberation. People are angry, but I haven't seen any riots yet about healthcare. And gasoline shortages and illegal immigration. Again, people might be angry about these and there might be protests, but I haven't really seen riots about these. But I know for a fact that the Vietnam War led to protests and riots. There's racial injustice, and that's leading to protests and riots. So 37-2 would be the best answer there. 44. Which United States foreign policy action best illustrate the concept of containment? So containment, they're trying to contain communism. They want to prevent it from spreading. This is entering into the Cold War. So keep in mind, this test goes in chronological order. So, if you see, where we're at, in the 70s, hopefully that will help you figure things out. So adopting the Truman Doctrine in 1947. So with the Truman Doctrine, we're attempting to use aid to prevent communism from spreading. So right now that might be the best answer, but let's see what our other options are. Ratifying the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1963. Well, that's not really containment. That's more about limiting nuclear weapons. But containment is more specifically about communism. 3, returning control of the Panama Canal to Panama in 1978. Again, nothing to do with communism. 4, granting diplomatic recognition to the People's Republic of China in 1979. This might be part of the Cold War and part of the policy détente, but the best example of the concept of containment would be adopting the Truman Doctrine, in which we send aid to Western European nations to prevent the spread of communism. And then 45, a lot of people struggle with this because I was shocked that no one's ever heard about like the phrase like trying to stick a square peg in a round hole. Like the square peg just doesn't fit, it's a round hole. So 45 says, which statement most accurately expresses the point of view of the cartoonist? Read the question. I like to look at the source from this is Mike Keith, the Denver Post in 2003. And then you could either start to look at and try to interpret the cartoon and then see which one of the answers best matches your interpretation, or you could read your options and then see which one fits. It depends on how your mind works. Personally, I prefer to look at the cartoon and determine what I see and what I think, and then try to find an answer that matches that best. So if I'm looking at this, I see individuals trying to push the Statue of Liberty up, and it says democracy, and they're trying to fit it into this round hole with a gentleman standing off to the side with a shovel and says the Middle East. So they're suggesting that the Middle East has created this space for democracy, but the space is round, and the base of Lady Liberty that represents democracy is square. So a square peg won't fit in a round hole. So even though the Middle East is maybe working with us and trying to make a space for democracy in their region, democracy doesn't really fit there. And that's how I'm seeing this. So I'm going to see which option best fits that. So one is Middle Eastern leaders favor isolationism over international cooperation. Well, they don't seem isolated. It seems like they're working with us. So that doesn't seem like the best option. Two, Middle Eastern leaders prefer representative government to military dictatorship. Well, there's nothing here about preference or military dictatorship. So I don't think two is a good answer. Three, the peoples of the Middle East are well prepared for democratic rule. Well, I don't think that's the case either, because, you can't fit a square peg in a round hole. Like it doesn't seem like they're well prepared, or else they would have been able to create the proper space. It would have been a square peg. Four, the United States version of government is unlikely to work in the Middle East. I think so. You can't fit a square peg in a round hole. So I think the best answer is four. The United States version of the government is unlikely to work in the Middle East. It just, the space there doesn't exist for it to properly function. So those are the ones that really popped out. I'm going to check my Twitter to see if anyone tweeted anything at me, which I don't think they did. Okay, I don't think anyone did. Okay. So before I look at the Thematic and DBQ, I just saw some names here that pop out that you're probably not familiar with. So I had someone today ask me who Cesar Chavez is. So Cesar Chavez is a Latino American who helps organize migrant farmers in California and the Midwest to unionize and form the United Farm Workers Union. And they are going to fight for rights and proper payment for farm workers. And he organizes strikes and boycotts in order to gain rights for them. And John L. Lewis is another leader of a labor union for the United Mine Workers of America. And then Samuel Gomper is also a union leader. So these are all examples of union leaders. You might not necessarily remember like the names of their unions. You're never going to be asked what was the name of their union. But if you can recognize that Samuel Gompers, John L. Lewis, Cesar Chavez helped form unions and expand the rights of workers, you should be okay. So they expand the rights of workers. Let me see really quick if there's anything else I want to go over. I don't think so. Okay, so thematic essays. So shout out to Mac, who keeps asking me to go over some strategies and everything. So thematic essays give you a theme. In this case, it's United States government actions. So keep in mind that government actions could be treaties, amendments, it could be legislation, which are called acts. It could be actions of the president, you know, any number of things, because this has to do with government actions. And this really, you have three branches of government. So you could really do any of that. So they give you a theme that you basically have to then write about two examples of. So in this case, two actions taken by the federal government. And then they'll give you 2 to 3 bullets. Usually the first part is describe the historical circumstances that led to the action. So for example, if we're doing the purchase of Louisiana Territory by Thomas Jefferson, you would want to talk about the U.S. trying to expand, manifest destiny, why we want this land. You talk about Napoleon offering up for $15 million, but basically, why do they do this action, or why does this happen? More generally speaking, since you don't know what the theme's going to be. And then the second and third could be one bullet or two. So in this case, there's one bullet. It says discuss the positive and or negative effects of the action. So you need to be careful. If it says effects, that's plural. You need to do at least 2 effects. It says and or, so you could do 2 positive, 2 negative, or a positive and a negative, but you need to do the effects. Sometimes you might see 3 bullets, and it might say describe the historical circumstances that led to the action, and then it might be explain the action taken by the government. And then the third piece might be discuss the impact of the action. So sometimes there's only 2 bullets, but you still have to write about 3 things: historical circumstances, and then the effects. But it'll tell you this is what's most important here. That's the task. That's what you have to write. And you need to be able to go back and say, yes, I've done all these things. If you didn't, then you're probably going to not score as high on the exam. But they tell you exactly what you need to do. And then they give you these examples. If you are not 100% positive that what you're choosing outside of these suggestions fits the theme, stick to the suggestions. Normally, you're not limited, but if you don't know for certain, please just stick to the suggestions. And again, use a test to take the test. You get it all at once. So if you need to, go back and look at the multiple choice and see if there's anything in there that will help you with this. You're also giving guidelines. This is your checklist. When you're done, say, did I develop all aspects of the task? Did I describe the historical circumstances? Did I discuss positive and or negative effects? If yes, check it off. Did I have relevant facts, examples, details? Check it off. You want to be as specific as possible. Give names if you can. Give dates if you can. Really explain what's going on. If you mention something, explain it. So if you talk about manifest destiny, tell us what it is. We basically, when we read these, want to know you know what you're talking about. And then a logical and clear plan of organization. Basically, you have an introduction, your body paragraphs, and a conclusion. And when you write your body paragraphs, do it in chronological order. For example, don't write about the invasion of Cuba and then the purchase of Louisiana Territory. You want to do Louisiana Territory first and then the invasion of Cuba. It makes more sense. It's a logical plan because it's chronological, okay? So you want to go in order. So the DBQ is where I see people usually lose a lot of points. People usually do fine on the thematic, but the DBQ, people kind of get sucked into those documents and they forget a key point, which is they need outside information. And once you forget that outside information, you're losing a lot of points there. So the DBQ is similar to the thematic in that, like the thematic, you'll get the historical context. This is what's going on in the U.S. at this time. Then you'll have your task. This is what you have to write. So this is on territorial expansion. So it says the United States expanded its territory on North American continent in the 1840s and then expanded its territories overseas between 1890 and 1917. These periods of expansion had positive and negative effects on the United States and on other peoples. So it says for territorial expansion in the 1840s and for territorial expansion between 1890 and 1917, describe the historical circumstances surrounding each period of expansion. So, territorial expansion 1840s, you need to describe why the US is expanding in the 1840s. And then the second period was 1890 to 1917. Why are we expanding? That's what they want to know. What's going on that makes us expand? Then again, it says effects for each period. So this means you need to describe at least 2 effects for expansion in the 1840s and at least 2 effects for the period 1890 to 1917. That's what you need to do. Now, there's a couple ways to make sure you don't get sucked into that darkness of the document and forget outside information. You could begin by brainstorming. So before you even flip the page and look at those documents, start to brainstorm what's going on in the 1840s, what's going on in between 1890 and 1917. Jot down whatever you remember, because whatever you remember that ends up not being in the documents is now outside information that you can use. If you look at this and say, well, I'm not really sure, in this case, I'm not really sure what they mean by 1840s or 1890 to 1917, then turn to the documents, but whatever they want you to write about, see if you can brainstorm before you turn the page. And if not, then the second way that you can prevent forgetting to include outside information is when you answer a question on the document, jot down in the margin any outside information that supports the document. This is going to help you build your analysis. It's going to help you remember to include outside information. It's totally worth it. Also, be careful. This says 2 reasons. You need to make sure there are 2 different reasons. If they're too similar, you'll only get credit for 1. So please make sure that you're answering the question accordingly. Take your time because the answer is here. Don't just rush to put something down. These are we consider these like free points. Everyone should get all the points on the documents because the answers are in them. So as you answer the question, jot down any outside information you can think about. If you can't think of anything for each of the documents, that's fine. I also highly recommend that after you're done answering all the questions for all the documents and you get to the end and they repeat your essay topic, you should then kind of jot down some ideas. So what I mean by this is I would write down like expansion 1840. Then I would jot down the documents that would help me with the historical circumstances, the documents that would help me talk about the effects, and any outside information. Then on this side, I would write down 1890 to 1917, and then what documents would help with historical circumstances, what documents would help with the effects, and then outside information. Doesn't have to be super detailed, but this helps you identify the documents you want to use. It helps you record outside information. And if you're like, look, I want to be honest with you, Mara, I'm not outlining anything. I'm going to get in the zone and I'm going to write. Fine. I can't make you outline. But another thing that you could do is like in the corner, you could write down like, oh, well, Spanish-American War. We're talking about like, U.S. getting territories, and we're talking about 1890 to 1917. So you could jot down like this is for the second period. You could also say, hey, this is going to help us talk about the effects. Put a little E for effects. If you're looking at the document, you're like, oh, this is definitely about the historical circumstances, like what's going on. Put a little HC. So identify, think about what are these documents applying to as far as my task? What can I use to, support this as far as outside information? But make some mental notes. If you just sit down and try to write this, you're going to forget something and you're going to have to go back and add it in, or you're going to completely forget and, your paper might be sloppy. So if you're not going to outline at the end, at least jot down some notes like, hey, this documents historical circumstances, or this is the effects. This applies to the first period or the second period. just to help you recognize when you go to write that that's what the document's for. My other recommendation for the DBQ is don't ignore your responses to these questions. These questions help you analyze the document. It's helping you with your analysis. These should be, whatever you write down and whatever documents you use, this answer or the answers you write should be in your paper. I see so many people answer the questions on these documents, and then when they write their paper, they're just like, document 4 shows a map of, Indian reservations. Okay, well, that's a good introduction, but then you should also include the effects of westward expansion. And like, according to document 4, 2 effects of westward expansion were the creation of Indian reservations, which prompted conflict and led to massacres of Native Americans at things like Wounded Knee and Sand Creek. But whatever your answer is, put it in the paper. These are like sentences you've already wrote that could be part of your essay. Don't ignore them. So make sure you go back to them. Let me just double check to make sure no one has tweeted at me to try to get some information added. So we have submitted some questions, but keep in mind in Google Classroom, I don't want Google Forms, Google Classroom, I have posted the student choice review. So Sunday night and Tuesday night at 7 p.m., I'm doing student choice. That means you can submit me questions. Now, please don't be lazy. Go to my videos from last year, go to our resources and look up information. If things then don't make sense, don't just ask me to explain World War I. And you have so many resources on it. If there's a specific piece you need help with, that's a different story. So you can submit questions for those reviews. You can also see resources. So in our Regents review packet, please make sure you're checking things out. When I'm telling you to go to the video from last year, that's that US Regents video breakdown. I have 2 videos with like 3 hours of material from last year and then some, all broken down by timestamp. So whatever you need to review, it's there. Go check it out. I also have some PowerPoints. So those of you who came to my review tonight on campus, we did look at some more modern issues. People who really struggle with the Constitution, I've broken the Constitution down, and I'll post the video for that as well. Reform movements, foreign policy, thematic essay topics. So all those are in there. Check them out. And then if you have questions, you can ask for clarification. Otherwise, I'm going to stop screen sharing. And it's probably not going to pick up my face again because my computer is wacky and it doesn't pick up my face all the time when I move it around. So anyways, those are some of my tips and tricks to keep in mind. You don't have to do all of them. Hey, there I am. But you can use the ones that you think are going to work for you. I highly recommend using some kind of tip to make sure you don't forget outside information on the DBQ. The most common grades I see when I grade those thematic essays and DBQ essays is a 3 on the thematic, which is basic, mid-level. Usually it's because there's not enough analysis explaining what things are and why they are important. And then I usually see a lot of 2s on the DBQ. And the reason I see a lot of 2s on the DBQ is people get sucked into the document. All they use is the document and there's no outside information. You need to have that outside information. So try to think of things that you can add as you go through the documents. Also, go back to the multiple choice. If there's multiple choice on the topic and it's not in the document, that's outside information. Use a test to take the test. The answers are in there usually someplace. And if there's like a map or a chart or some kind of graph, reason through it. If you can't prove or justify the answer looking at the visual they've given you or the document they've given you, that's probably not the answer, and you can kind of cross it out, use process of elimination. Okay, so I'm going to post some links to other videos that I've referenced, and then please, by all means, submit other questions that you might have for the next one. Have a good night.